Okay, well, it's my pleasure to welcome Julie Kuntsler, who is one of our volunteer tutors and works, I'll see if I'm getting this correctly, works in the high-tech industry and has done so both in the US and in Israel. So she has a unique perspective. And many months ago, we invited her to just give us a little insight at a tutor talks, which I did not record. And it was such a remarkable conversation and such a great learning opportunity that I asked Julie if she would do an encore presentation for us. And she readily agreed, which is makes me very appreciative. I would ask that everybody mute themselves so that when Julie's presenting, we don't have background noise, and there'll be plenty of opportunity for questions and conversation as well. So I am going to give the floor to Julie, and thank you again, Julie, for doing this for us and giving us the benefit of your experience.
Yeah, sure, gladly. So I'll talk a little bit in the beginning, and then please, as you have questions, just raise your hand or interrupt me, but just a few minutes of an overview. And I come from the perspective that English is extremely important to Israelis. And I'll go through a whole process here of just to provide the perspective on why it's so important. First of all, for anyone who wants to travel outside of Israel, Israel is a country of 9-10 million people. It's really small. And if you think about it compared to Norway or Sweden, there's a reason why Norwegians and Sweden and Swedish folks speak English, or at least speak English and maybe even German and maybe even 4 other languages. When you have a very small country in terms of population, and in Israel situation, very small regionally as a country, doing a travel, you're immediately outside of Hebrew. Then if we look at work in Israel, even in jobs that don't require degrees, such as driving a taxi, working in a hotel, it requires English because you're going to run into people who don't speak Hebrew. So you need some level of English. And that's before you even get anywhere close to high tech. Let's say you work for a company, a bank in Israel. Most of the banking applications, while what the customer may see is in English, right? The application that you see on your phone for bank discount in Israel or Bank Hapoalim is in English. The programming behind it is in English. So what you may see on the applications in Hebrew, but the program, how it was developed, is in English. And then if you work in a high-tech company, especially an international high-tech company in Israel, it could be Google, it could be Amazon, it could be Intel, it could be Pfizer. Okay, Pfizer has a very large Israeli development center. It could be any number of high-tech companies. They will do everything in English. All of their emails are in English. All of their corporate documents are in English, because they're not going to bother to have half of the things in Hebrew and half of them in English. So everything ends up being in English in most high-tech companies in Israel. Now, of course, at lunch, if several people go out to lunch, whether it's at Pfizer or Intel, they're going to speak Hebrew. The Israelis are going to speak Hebrew at lunch or at a party, at a wedding of a colleague, but their work itself is going to be in English. So it would be like one of us immersing ourselves in working in Germany, or working for a German company where everything has to be in German, or working for a French company where everything has to be in French. Yes, you can still go to lunch and speak English, but everything you do on your job, on your 8 to 10 hour a day job, has to be in a different language. And if we dig even further into the field of programming, because Israel is a relatively small country, the programming languages that they use to develop applications, information technology, whether it's Python, for example, the computer languages that our students learn they're in English. Okay, they're all in English. If you go to a country the size of China, some of those programming languages may have been translated into Chinese, but in Israel, they're not translated into Hebrew. So all of their programming skills, the basic programming instructions and applications that they use, it's all in English. So what a lot of the students do when their English is not good, they constantly run Google Translator. And there's several problems with Google Translate. Look, I say quite, and I don't mean this meanly, I say thank God for Google Translator, because I cannot tell you how many times when I've traveled for work overseas, I've used Google Translator. But first of all, it takes time. Okay. And second, it's not perfect as a translation tool. It's better than nothing, far better than nothing, but it's not perfect. So you begin to see how difficult it is for our students. Then think another point that happens to them is that even when they're beginning programming students, before they've even started to have a lot of experience, when they go on job interviews, almost always in the field of programming, a portion of the interview will be done in English, because the hiring manager, HR, the human resource person, wants to see how good is their English. It doesn't mean that they won't get a job at an entry-level programming level if their English isn't good, but it lets the company know, golly gee, you know, what level of English are we dealing with or not dealing with here? And if they expect, and if they have the desire to be promoted to advance in their company, or from company to company, if they change jobs, English becomes more and more important, because if you're going to be managing people, if you're going to be managing an international team, you have to know English. So it becomes a major obstacle or a major opportunity, if we turn it around, for our students. I've tutored 2 students, and I'm still tutoring one of them. It's like a long-term relationship. And what I would keep in mind too with the students who we have is that in most cases, they never traveled overseas with their families. Okay, they economically, they did not have the opportunity to travel overseas, unlike many other Israelis who are from better economic classes, higher economic, socioeconomic classes. So our students haven't seen overseas. They don't have the context of international business, international, anything international. And this is not being judgmental. It's a fact. If I look at one of my students, she went to a very, very, very mediocre, and I'm being kind here, high school in Hod HaSharon. It's known to be the lowest level of education of high schools in Hod HaSharon. She did the lowest number of, or the easiest classes she could do. She had no support at home to study. Her parents, neither parent can read or write any language. Okay, I'm not taught, they speak Amharic, but her parents do not read or write Amharic, let alone Hebrew, let alone English. So she did not have the context for study hard, get yourself into a good high school, get yourself into a good high school program. She didn't have the context coming from home. I mean, we see the same thing in the United States. So typically, if you've gone to university, you tend to push your kids to go to university, or at least to go to read and write and have a trade, have a skill. So it's a tough battle for these kids, because they generally don't have a lot of support coming from home to back up their educational endeavors. So they don't have the English, they don't have the focus on English, they don't have the support from home, in many cases, to learn English well, the importance of English. And then on top of it, in Israel, you absolutely have to have English if you're a programmer. There's no way around it. And that's my opening statement here.
Julie, do you want people to ask you some questions
Sure,
at the
gladly.
moment? Anybody have questions? You can use the reactions to raise your hand, or Andrea's got her hand up, her actual hand. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Go for it, Andrea.
Yeah. You have to take yourself off mute, yeah.
Okay, hi.
Hi,
I'm enjoying this session. Thank you so much for doing this.
sure.
I have one question. I've been to Israel five times, and I still don't understand the society well at all. And I have also I come from Seattle, where Microsoft had brought in a lot of Israelis and functions. I was curious about race. In Microsoft in Seattle, it's so multiracial. They have blacks and people from India, a lot of them, all different races, and it's just not even a factor. And I know that in Israel that our students are subjected to a certain amount of racism. And I was wondering, does that go into work also in these computer businesses?
Yeah, so I'll tell you my sense is that there's less discrimination against Ethiopian Israelis in high tech than in non-high tech. Okay, so why am I saying that? That if we look at, I'm just down the coast from you near San Jose, that if we look at high tech or high tech jobs within even non-high tech companies, so Amazon, for example, Microsoft are high tech companies, but let's say IT, information technology, programming jobs in a bank or at Pfizer, or for the Ministry of Education, you have to have education. And the minute that you're well educated, that you have a skill, while there may be discrimination, there's less discrimination. And this is another reason why education is so important, and programming skills are so important. I'd also say another reason comes down to salary, that and not just pure salary, like how much you earn a week or a month, but for example, during the first part of COVID, when Israel shut down, severely shut down, high-tech companies, people who work for high-tech companies continue to work from home. If I look at my daughter who lives in Hod HaSharon, she and her husband continue to work from home. They continue to get paid. If I look at one of my Tootie's parents, they both do blue collar jobs. One of them cleans homes, the other one cleans windows. They were out of work. They got no pay. Okay, they could sign up for unemployment, which a lot of Israelis in those situations did. But you already see a huge difference there. So not only is there the difference in salary, but then if something goes wrong, if God forbid we're in another shutdown situation, those who work on computers all day can continue to work from anywhere. And those who work, cleaning other people's homes lost their income.
Thank you, Julie. Jessica has her hand up, and then Lisa Newman. So Jessica and then Lisa.
Hi. Thank you, Julie. This is feeling very good and very helpful, and thank you, Marla, for organizing it. I had a question about one thing I've noticed. I'm now on my third partner, and none of them have taken formal English classes. All of them have taught themselves a remarkable amount of English, watching movies and TV shows and reading on the internet. And I feel like that's kind of shaped how we learn together, as in we're not drilling verbs or other parts of speech, but they pick up so quickly. I'm amazed. I always wondered if you could talk about that a bit.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So anyone who goes through the Israeli educational system actually has formal English classes, starting in some cases in first grade, some cases in third grade. The question is, one, do they pay attention? Two, do they cut that class? You know, there's a lot of other factors there. So what happens to many of these kids, because they're going to less than grade schools with no support or minimal support for formal education from home, they don't learn English when they're supposed to learn English starting pretty young. So yes, the good news is that they pick it up from computer games, they pick it up from TV shows, from movies. And that's all really great. I mean, it's really fortunate that they can do that they can watch American or British sitcoms or drama shows and pick up English. The problem, and there's several problems here, is that they lack context for many things that go beyond knowing English slang or phrases. So I'll give you one example of lacking context. One of the partners, and it's a good way to call them, is he got a job at what is considered one of the hottest high-tech companies that has a branch in Israel. And he said to me, and he picked up all of his English, very, very bright, brilliant guy from watching TV and drama, you know, whatever. Okay. And he said to me, I think I want to change jobs. And I said to him, I wanted to say to him, you've got to be kidding me. You're at the company that people around the world die to get into. And so I started reading with him what was written about his company from financial investors, from the high-tech sector, from just different articles about his company, which he had never thought to read. Or to even, it wasn't that he didn't think to read them, he didn't even think about the context. How do you look at the company that you're working with or working for? So yes, they pick up a lot, which is good, from the internet, from TV, from movies, whatever, but it doesn't mean they have the context on how to understand things, how to think about things. That for those of us who have kids, and let's say your child came home at some point and said, you know, I think I want to do this, or I think I want to do that, or I'm interested in this course, or, you know, I think I want to take advanced placement biology. And you would have a dialogue with them. They're missing that dialogue. And they're missing that dialogue also when it comes to Army service. One of my long-term student, she was lucky that she got into an Army unit where it's the computer Army unit, the main computer Army unit in the Army. And from there, she became a help desk expert, and that's what got her interested in computers. But again, you know, if you look at Israeli kids in 11th and 12th grade, those who have the context for understanding what the Army can give them will try to get into certain units. And there's a lot of competition for certain units in the Israeli Army. And the kids who compete for those units understand that, yes, you know, it's a lot of hard work to get in and to do well in that unit, but they also get a lot back, like computer training, or becoming a pilot, which means then you could maybe become a commercial pilot later in life, or work in the aviation industry. Or let's say if you're in information technology, that's already a heads up for getting a job in programming or getting into Tel Aviv University. So yes, the internet and international media has definitely helped these students, but it doesn't mean they have the context for a whole lot.
Very interesting. I'm gonna have some questions too, but Lisa, you go next. You have to
Lisa.
You have to unmute.
Unmute, okay, sorry. I am a social worker for many years, as well as teaching ESL. So my question, and I do want to say thank you so much for spending the time with us. I'm wondering about what are the positive things that make some kids or some young people better able to make the leap than others. And I have a couple of examples, and I'm not sure what to learn from them. One is a young man who was a shepherd until 17, illiterate. I said, illiterate? What about Amharic? He said, no, illiterate, completely. And then he began to study at 17. he had a benefactor. He had somebody who noticed that he was very bright, an older woman who facilitated a scholarship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. His life is on a whole different path. Another woman is a great communicator. I mean, I always understand what she's trying to say, but her English is terrible. But she's interested in the world. She traveled to Canada and spent a year working at an Ethiopian restaurant here. She has, I guess you could call it, some context, but terrible, terrible language skills, and would love to work in high tech. What I'm trying to ask, what are the things that we can encourage in our students, or that we can identify in our students, that do help them get a leg up? We understand the obstacles, there are a lot of them, but what helps them?
Yeah, I would say from what I've seen, what helps them, one is the difference a good job can make economically to them and their family. Because in both cases, both personal cases I've had, they're helping to support their family.
Yeah.
So one's doing it directly with paying for his mother's apartment every month for his
Wow.
mom and the younger sisters. The other one, where the mom refuses to take money directly, the students doing it other ways, like we're
Yes.
going shopping for the dresses for, a family wedding.
Yeah.
So one of them is economically, that what you can do to help your family when you have a job that pays more than minimum wage. And that's definitely what's driving a lot of, I think a good number of the students to go into the programming course. And from there, some of them continue to take formal education. Some of them actually go back and apply to university, which I'll get into in 1 minute. If I forget, please remind me. So I think one of the major factors is economics, and what it can mean to have a good job, to help themselves, help their family, travel, see the world, and what eventually it means for helping their own kids when they decide. The university issue, I want to explain this a little bit, and I'm going to make some generalizations here, which we can find exceptions to, but the educational system in Israel is more similar to Europe than it is to the States. So what do I mean by that? To get into one of the universities in Israel, like the Technion in Haifa, Tel Aviv University, Ben Gurion University, you need really good high school scores, and you need very good, what's the equivalent of the SAT. But it's the equivalent of the SAT in Israel has a math section and has an English section. Okay. So because again, most textbooks beyond your first course will be in English if you're studying biology, chemistry, engineering, you're going to be your trade journals, your research papers, everything's in English. So what happens if a student graduates with really poor grades and doesn't even bother to take the college entrance exam? And many kids don't take it till after the Army anyway, and there's special courses to take to help you with it. But what do? They put themselves through a very rigorous program that helps them improve their high school grades. They can go back and in evening courses or day courses with older people improve their scores. But there's almost no chance of getting into university, a true 4-year, 3 or 4 year Bachelor of Science type university without good grades. I say it's a little bit different versus the States, because at least in some states, there's community colleges where you can go for a couple of years and improve. If you get really good grades in community college, there's a chance that you can transfer to a 4-year program. But Israel's much harsher, and it's much more like Germany in the UK in that sense, that you have to be prepared to get really good grades in high school to get into university. So what do you do with a student who doesn't have, goes through the programming class, yeah, and says, wow, if only I now had a computer science degree or an information technology degree. It's like, it's not too late at that point to help them continue to pick up their English, redo their high school courses, redo the entrance exams, but it's really tough. And sometimes it takes them until they're in the programming class or until they're in the Army or post-Army to really see what their opportunities could be if they went back and improved their grades.
Thank you.
Ivan Wolf has his hand up. If you want to take the floor, Ivan.
Yeah, I'm a newbie to doing this tutoring, and the student that I have is 32 years old. He made only about 2.5 years ago, apparently got a degree in Ethiopia, a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. He told me that he had studied some English in Ethiopia in high school. I don't know if that's common, and so I don't know what other people's experience with their students are. But I also had a question whether in the high-tech industry, larger companies, do they provide any type of English language classes for their employees? I know in states that does occur in some industries where there are a lot of immigrants, and if they're able to provide that resource, it's available right at the workplace.
Some of them do. I know a number of companies in Israel who do that, but I wouldn't assume that they all do that. So it may be something that he needs to find, on his own if he wants more formal than what this program that we do does. But some of them do, and he shouldn't be shy about asking about that. If there's a program for him that where he can get reimbursed, or where they pay for it and they reduce his salary, but it's pre-tax rather than post-tax. I mean, there may be something that the company's willing to do for him.
I have a couple questions, Julie, if
Sure.
it's good.
Yeah.
One is, I think one of the things that's really important in the comments that you've made from the start is this sort of fluid role between being an English tutor and playing a sort of a mentoring role with the student, in that, especially when you think about context and how the world works, even if, you're like Lisa, I was a social worker, I wasn't in business still. I think people have experiences as professionals that can help steer their student. And I guess I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are the key things that you think we should sort of have our radar on for in terms of mentoring? I think the example you gave about your student hadn't looked up his company and didn't know, that was a really powerful example. And I'm just wondering if there are any other ways to think about that role within the comfort level of each tutor and each of our professional experience, which is different.
For sure. So one of them is to pick out articles. They can pick out the article in a newspaper or on the internet to read together. So if their interest is business, they may pick out a business article. If their interest is where to go on vacation, it may be an article about, I don't know, some vacation spot. But I think, just reading with them articles, whether it's on a news site like CNN or some news site, because when you discuss the article with them, you can give them your own context or your own perspective on what you're reading. The other is, if they've been through the Army, which most of the programming students have been, ask them to tell you a story about where they had a conflict or where they had an issue with a fellow soldier or with their commander, or where they didn't understand what was asked of them. Like, it can be something as simple as, tell me, did you ever get into a disagreement with your commander when you were in the Army, or a disagreement with a difference of opinion with one of a team member when you were in the Army? The reason why I say that is and again, let me give you a generalization. Let me get away with a generalization here. They don't have their parents to talk to about those things. Okay. Now, some of it depends on the student, how long they've been in Israel, how long their parents have been in Israel. But generally speaking, because their parents are not working what we call white collar jobs, the teamwork is different. If I think about my two students, where the mothers were both cleaning houses, I don't want to say that there's no conflict between them and their employer, or between them and, let's say, the homeowner, but it's not teamwork as we think about teamwork on projects. So it's interesting for them if they can describe it to you, and you can just listen and say, wow, without becoming, I'm certainly not trained as a social worker, but one of mine last week was telling me where she was brought into a situation that wasn't her responsibility, but the Q&A, the quality control department, quality and test group, wanted her to try to help fix a problem. So shouldn't she tell her manager? Should she not tell her manager? You can guide them on these types of questions they have, or situations they've had, without having to be an expert in high tech, because it's called human relations and communications. So I told her, yes, she should tell her manager that a different department asked her for help on something, and she should let her manager know. But you begin to see that they don't have, or many of them don't have, the context for knowing what do they do when they don't know what to do. Where we would ask our friends, right? We go to our girlfriends or guy friends, or former bosses, former managers. They don't have it. They're young, and they can't talk about it at home. And in many cases, their siblings may not be in. Many of them will have siblings. It doesn't mean that their siblings can help them here, depending upon the jobs that their siblings have.
That's really interesting. And it leads me to my next question on some level. What we hear, sort of generalizing from the students as they're coming in, is they don't have any English speakers in their social networks. So the English that they have comes from, what the tutors who were on this call described, either something from the Israeli school system, and I've seen firsthand what that looks like. It's not pretty in many cases, or from, what they've picked up through media, TV, et cetera, et cetera. And so, we've been emphasizing that, we're not an English language program. We're not teaching English. We're providing a safe space to improve fluency and confidence in speaking, which I think we're doing an amazing job at. But one of the questions then that runs back to me is, especially as I'm onboarding new volunteers, is how good English do they need to have? How, should we be correcting every mistake? I suggest no.
Right.
How do you sort of guide them to improvement? And, what do you think these companies are looking for when they're checking out their English?
So let's start with the last bit of your question and work backwards. They want to see that the student or the interviewee can at least introduce themselves and say what they're interested in and what training they have. So I worked over and over again with mine on, my name is so-and-so. I was in the following unit in the Army. I ran, for example, I was with Mamram, that's the central computer unit in the Army. I worked the help desk, and I managed many different requests, especially when there were field operations. So help them get 3 or 4 sentences down that they can get comfortable with. And of course, it has to be in their own words, but work with them on those 3 or 4 sentences. And I can tell you, we didn't spend the whole session on it every week. That would have driven both of us crazy, but we spent over a period of time, we worked on that. And I know that you also run, sessions on the resume. And this is a really difficult situation for them, because they either culturally, and again, a generalization, in general, Ethiopian is a culture, they do not brag. Okay. Think, the opposite of Elon Musk. Okay. I don't know, think they do not brag. So you have to work with them diligently for them to tell you what they did, So for example, she ran the help desk during field operations. She handled numerous questions coming in from the field when the field officers had problems with the computer applications. That's a big deal. She could handle the stress and the pressure of that. But you have to it took a lot of time to sort of get her to see what a wow that was, that she can work under stress, she can work under pressure. So, the level of English, we're not English teachers, or at least most of us aren't. I certainly don't correct everything that they say to me, but you want them to have some comfort with the language, that they can describe what they do, how they do it, why it matters to them, why it mattered to the company or to their manager. And I really call it like getting them more comfortable with the language and with speaking the language, even if they make mistakes.
That's really helpful, and I think really insightful. And we're going to do something on resumes. And I think there's a lot of next month, there's a lot of parallel conversations that go on, I think, with being able to talk about yourself, and then also being able to describe in English, what you've done on a resume. So I hope many of you can come back for that. We'll record that as well. Anything else, Julie, that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so the one final thing here from my side is just keep asking them to talk about, for example, what course or what section of the programming course did you enjoy? What was easy? What was hard? Why do you think it was hard? Just ask them a lot of questions. And you'll see oftentimes they'll start to answer, and then they say, wait a second, let me start over, because they realize they don't know how to say what they wanted to say. So they have to back up and think about it and say it in a different way. But just ask them a lot of questions, because I promise you that they were not asked a lot of questions as they were growing up. It's like, sometimes we have to tell our kids, don't badger your child or our grandchild when they come home from school. Let them have milk and cookies and then ask them how their day is. You don't have to ask them 50 questions about their day. But I promise you, these kids, for the most, our students, and again, generalization, for the most part, were not asked about their day. Their parents were busy trying to survive, make a living. So ask them short questions, ask them to talk about themselves, and it will help them with English. It will also help give them a perspective on what they've accomplished and what they want to still accomplish.
Beth Zinderman has her hand up. That was beautiful, Julie.
So thank you, Julie. This is a great conversation. I didn't know, I couldn't even imagine what the name of the hottest company was. So I wrote that in the chat. I just, for my
Oh,
own,
so yeah, so he got a job, this one guy, he got a job at VMware,
okay,
and it's a company that actually designs tools for other developers.
okay.
That's part of what they do a lot of things, but what he was working on. So can you imagine? He's a programmer, entry-level programmer, but he did so well that the company that writes programming tools for other programmers hired him. And VMware is considered a leader in what's called container, cloud-based, cloud native-based containerization. It's one of the hotter areas in high tech right now. But as I said, he didn't have the context to understand it.
Right. So something I've been doing with my student, well, one thing I was thinking about, I've noticed, I hate to say the boys or the men, the young men I've been meeting, I've had 4 students in this program so far. Many times they are not consistently showing up. Like I almost can predict when they're not gonna come to our session. And some of it, I believe, is because they're living at home and they're under pressure to do other things with their families. Even though they're young and they may not have children of their own, they have their families that they need to. And I didn't realize about Sigid. I looked and I wonder if that's what messed up. Like if they're doing preparations now for the observation of the holiday, and it's in 2 days, right, Marla? Yeah. So I thought maybe I could ask my student to record on WhatsApp something once a week so that they're at least having to, I mean, we really can't require that they do any homework or anything extra. They don't have that much time. But I thought this might be an interesting thing, and I wanted to know what you thought. Asking them to just talk to you, leave you a little message in English. Even though my Hebrew's improving, so we talk half in Hebrew and half in English. I would like them to practice, the getting the practice in, because they're working with, their programming is all in English. I got to learn more about that. That's actually what I'm studying now, is programming and teaching all of that. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I found a lot of vocabulary to share in English, which was tough for him. He knew what it meant, but he couldn't read it to me even. The words were so difficult. Like even the word programming was hard for this particular student, but he knew what it meant. He just couldn't say it. So I don't want to push too much on the pronunciation, but when he does go to have an interview, I want him to feel comfortable. And I really liked your suggestions that we get them to almost practice with us at some point what they need to say in their interviews when they're at that step. And is this a 2-year program? I forget how long the program goes for.
Yeah, I believe the program is one full year. And so a couple of things. I think you can ask them to record. I don't know how comfortable, I think it's sort of an individual thing, whether they'll feel comfortable or not with doing it, but sure, you can ask them that. The other thing, which some of them may be able to do, is if they're still in the program, they may be able to do the session. And I know this depends on the time of day for you and for them, but they may be able to do the session from their classroom or from the lab the computer lab they have at the program, because then they're not home. Let's say if they can stay an hour late and do it from the classroom. I know mine did that a few times. One of them did that a couple of times. It was easier for her than trying to do it from home, where, when you share a bedroom with several siblings and there's no quiet space and somebody's listening in, and you can also ask them that if they can stay, if they're in the program, if they can stay, or if they've already begun to work, if they can do it from work.
Yeah, I haven't, most of my students or it's before they get work.
Yeah.
I would love to find out how they're doing, how those who've gone on are doing, like, do I don't know, Marla maybe could speak to that, following up on with them. Is there follow-up to see how graduates are doing on the job or? Is that
Um,
got-
So the tech career does have a follow-up process, and you know, we've worked with almost 400 students now, and we're like
Mm.
less than 2 full-time staff members, so we're sort of not able to follow up maybe as much as we'd like in the ideal world, but tech career does actually, you know, we're like a value add to the training that they get through their program. And what Tech Career shares with us, by the way, is that English, and I've said this before, but English, when you break the barrier of English, it breaks all kinds of other barriers for these students. It builds confidence, self-confidence beyond just being able to speak in English. It's a very empowering skill for the students. I don't know if Julie has anything she wants to add to that, but it's a very powerful mechanism for preparing these students for the world of work.
Oh, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, they need English for programming. They need English if they're going to work for any type of company, international company, or a company that has any international dealings, which most companies do at some level, whether it's procurement, you know, supply chains. They need English, and the better their English gets, the better chance they have of success on their job and on their career path. So it's huge. Let alone, you know, if they want to ever travel or do anything outside of Israel, it's extremely important. It's extremely important. I cannot stress enough the economic value or worth of being a programmer in Israel versus cleaning the street. You know, this is, and I think that for many North American Jews, we take education. I don't want to say I shouldn't speak for everyone, but to some degree we take it for granted, you know, that our parents cared about our education. And they would have done anything in their power to help us, even if they couldn't financially. They certainly tried to help in other ways. And it's not the situation with these programming students. They're not coming from home, generally speaking, they're not coming from homes where their parents can do much except put food on the table and a roof over their head. The parents themselves are struggling to make it to financially.
I agree. And I think that, you know, the Ethiopian immigrants, unlike many from more European and industrial societies, are I mean, they're one of the later waves of immigration. So there's where you fall into a society when you're an immigrant,
Yeah.
your normal circumstances. And then when you come from an agrarian, tribal society where you know, the Israeli society is it's a first world society. So
Right.
that puts additional barriers and burdens on the integration into
Right.
Israel.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is what I would say is that the Russian Aliyah, when a lot of Russians came, and now when some Ukrainians have come, they know how to read and write. They may not know English or Hebrew, but they know how to read and write. They know the importance of reading and writing. They may have been programmers in, you know, if we go back to the huge Aliyah from Russia in like 1989, 1990, they may not have been programming on the most up-to-date computer compared to the US or Israel, but they knew programming. They may not have been scientifically on. A lot of them went to work for like Teva, the Israeli pharmaceutical company. They may not have had the latest biotech engineering or chemical engineering, but Russia valued education. The Ukraine values education. Formal education. Let me be really specific here. Formal book education. So yes, it's a real challenge. And the same thing, you know, if we go far enough back, the Jews who had immigrated from Iraq, Northern Africa, who came, let's say, around the same time as Jews from Europe, also had it very hard because it was just Israeli culture is much more Western European, let's say European, than it is North African. You know, generalization there.
Anything else before we say goodbye to Julie? This was fantastic, Julie. Thank you for doing it again.
Yeah, thank you,
We learn-
everyone. Yeah,
We learn something every time, and the conversation goes in different ways. And I think you gave us a lot of really concrete ways to consider engaging with the students with the goal of improving their English so that they can be more competitive professionally. And I
yeah,
think that is
absolutely.
ultimately the goal. So I will say thank you. I will get
Sure,
this
thank you.
put up on our YouTube channel and get the link out so you can review it again. And I wish everyone, for those in the US, happy and healthy Thanksgiving. And for our Canadians, I'm a month late, but I hope you had a good
You too, Marla. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Be well.
Thank you both.
Safely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.